And then you might find me in public spinning yarn, and people are like, why? Is this the way you want to spend your time? Why spend your time doing this? And I'm like, why not? Why are you not slowing down enough so that you could actually, sit with what is?
From the top.
Yo, this is too much. Slow down. Peace, God, peace.
From Music City, Nashville to the world. This is not a podcast. This is not a conversation about art. This is an attempt to wake you up. And now that I've got your attention, don't listen to the words. Listen to the silence between the words. You are now entering the Museum of Presence. Brittney Boyd Bullock is an artist from Memphis, Tennessee, creating these amazing sculptures out of yarn. And she says that her work is a kind of liberation. She embodies what the Museum of Presence is all about. And Evan Brown and Camilla Sander sat down with her to find a little bit more about her process. Here's Evan.
We are here. This is like one of my favorite artists, honestly. Like I've been putting her on in every group that I'm in. I love Brittney Boyd Bullock. Brittney, yo, you are in your studio, looks like, and you have this yarn behind you. First off, just tell us where you are and that yarn behind you. What is all that?
Yeah, so I am based in Memphis, Tennessee. It is home for me, always has been. And behind me is just a little bit of the material that I use in my work and in my practice every day. And most of it up here is yarn, fiber, wool, that kind of thing. And it's really interesting too to see it behind me and to be using it today, because I feel like I fell in love with fiber years ago as a child, and to see it come back full circle in my life is very special to me. Yeah.
You said a couple things that we gotta talk about. Like, number one, Memphis, Tennessee. Shout out to what Memphis is, the barbecue, the food, the people, the atmosphere. Tell us what it's like living in Memphis, being an artist in Memphis, how you engage in Memphis. Tell us.
For sure. So, I think Memphis is kind of one of those cities where it's either you love it or you don't. And so for me, being in Memphis my entire life, went to college here and have been here, I've been here, I've seen it in these lots of like evolutionary ways, and have seen it kind of expand and at times retract. Memphis is a place that it's a feeling city. So you don't have to, in my opinion, say much here, but you can feel a lot here. To me, the stories and the history and the legacy here like radiates from the ground. Is also what I mean by feeling city. Like sometimes when I am downtown by the river, or I'm at a specific spot, I may not always have the language or the words or the history there, but there's something there that I can feel. And Memphis does that for me. It's also a city full of storytellers and griots and elders who know their stuff and are willing to tell you what they know if you're willing to sit at their feet. It's also a place as an artist where relationships matter here, probably more so than anything. How you engage with people, how you show up, how you treat them, how they treat you matters here. Whereas when I think about a place like, a bigger inner city like, Chicago, is so big that you can kind of move in a way and maybe not ever run into the same people. Whereas Memphis, you running into the same people all the time, in all ways. It's very incestuous in that everybody knows everybody works with everybody. So relationships matter in a place like Memphis. And the last thing I'll say too is, as someone who has built their career here, what I find that we need now more than ever is is our ability to connect in a way that feels real and feels rooted in deep care. And I think that's what's going to keep Memphis growing in a way that feels sustainable and also just rooted in love. So I got a lot to say about Memphis, but I know we got a whole bunch of time.
I wanna talk on something that you said about the feeling of like you can walk down to the river in Memphis and you just feel something and you get it from the ancestors around and the people that you just talked to. How does that go into creating your work and what your work looks like, and the textures and feels of it? How does all that play into what you create?
So I think story is very important. I think the stories that we tell, that we choose to tell, are very important. And I've been a lover of stories for as long as I can remember. But I think it hasn't been until recently where I have understood the role of story in my work. It wasn't until about, I'd say maybe 5 or 7 years ago, where I actually was more intentional about inviting a level of story into my practice. And so it shows up for me now wanting to reclaim some stories. So when I think about the notion of spinning yarn, part of that is about a reclamation of that story, because as far as I know, in my history and what has been told to me is that people from this region along the Mississippi River, particularly in Tunica, where my grandmother is from, Black people pick cotton. And that has been the beginning and the end of that story. And so when I think about the material that I use, there is something for me to be said about, okay, but what is the fullness of those people? They were not just that. Also, what happened after that? I started to think about that in the context of my work. And so that led me to wanting to understand, okay, what happened after the cotton was picked? Turns out it was spun and then made into cloth by weaving. That my folks did. And I'm like, why do we not know this story? And so part of me spinning yarn is about the reclamation of that story. But then also in my collage work, I include imagery all the time because images are important. They are memory keepers. They help to shape story as well. And so oftentimes I am thinking about the image as a fuller story, a longer story, or I'm trying to piece a story together that I don't always know. And so even when I talk about the images that I use, I'm often using imagery where you can't see the face fully. It's maybe in profile, or the head is turned or something like that, because I don't always know the people that I'm using. I don't always know their story. And I understand that I am extracting them out of an environment and a story that they're currently in. And I think there's a sacredness to that I'm aware of. And so part of me is interested in what their story was, but also interested in continuing the story rather. And so all these things matter. Also too, like for me, and I think this really kind of solidified more after having a child and then thinking about then what stories will he hold about me, about our family, about our elders and our ancestors, because they help to shape so much of who we are. A lot of the things that we go after oftentimes are because of the stories we've told ourselves or the stories that other people tell us. And so like storytelling is the root of us, the root of our culture, the root of our history. I can talk story all day too.
This interview is for the Museum of Presence, and it's presence in every part of that you just described, right? Your presence when making it, the presence that you have, the presence that was there when that photo was taken or when that cotton was picked, and these stories that come along with those, and presence in every moment of this. Like, we feel so strongly about presence here in this magazine, and this edition is called "May I Be Brave Enough to Speak My Truth." Right? You and that in this paper with this, with your artwork. what would you say is, we give you that title, may I be brave enough to speak my truth? What does that mean to you? And how would you correlate and coalesce around it?
First of all, like, wig back, may I be brave enough to speak my truth. Wow. I don't know. So just track with me a little bit as I dissect this with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're here.
I feel like one of the biggest responsibilities I have as an artist is to hold a container of truth so that people can then engage with me in my work. And I'm not the only artist who's ever thought of that. It's not a novice idea.
Miss Nina Simone.
My thing, what I hope to do all the time, is to be so completely myself, which that's what I hope I am. To be so much myself that my audiences and even people who meet me are confronted. They're confronted with what I am, inside and out, as honest as I can be. And this way, they have to see things about themselves immediately.
One of the most gratifying, beautiful, yet daunting and arduous things that I do and that we do as artists is to speak our truth publicly through our work. And because I think we are invited first by God and through spirit to speak visually with our hands and with our hearts, that comes in and of itself with a level of bravery. I talk often about like how when I'm in my studio, it's very much of a silo practice from, I have studio assistants, but they're following my lead. And so I'm in my studio, like wrestling with these ideas and calling forth what needs to be called forth and sitting with what needs to be sat with. And so you make the work. I'm making the work in my studio, then I need to birth it and give it to the world. And then when I do that, I often am realizing, okay, just like when you birth a baby, now you expose it. Now you like, what y'all think about it? You know what I mean? Like now you like, treat it well, right. Hold it with kindness, hold it with the same love and heart that I did. But that's not always the case. And that takes a level of bravery. It takes a level of courage. And oftentimes when I show my work, I have to go in knowing like part of this, when I made it, it was for me. But then when I decided to show it to the public, it became ours. And then so now the conversation is, what do we do with our thing? How do we hold our thing? But it took a level of courage for me to do that. Yeah. I also think it takes a level of courage to birth a child in the same way, in the very same way, So yeah, man, having a level of bravery to speak your truth is the essence of an artist. Yeah. It is like our role. It is what we're called to do in a way. Now, some of us choose to not, and that's okay too. Maybe there's space for all that. But I think for me, it is imperative that when I am making my work and then presenting it back to the world, that it is honest.
I love it. We could just go on with storytelling and presence, and being brave enough to speak your truth. And you say it so much in regards to once you put the artwork out, it's for everybody. Now we all got to take care of this thing. We talk about this birthing, these soft yarn sculptures that you create. How do you get down this path of making these sculptures?
Yeah. So that too has been like a journey, full circle moment as well. So I mentioned earlier that I fell in love with fiber and yarn a long time ago. And in middle school, my mom would take me to the craft store and I would buy what's called a latch hook kit. So it would come with all the materials and tools in this little box, and I would spend my weekend latch hooking, which is what I do now. It's the process that I do now. And of course, you get older, you grow up, you have to make decisions, and you lose the hobbies that were once your thing. And then, we're talking about the notion of birth in so many ways. Like the metaphor of birth is just solid because it could be used in so many ways. But I was pregnant with my son Hendrix, and I had a really challenging pregnancy. And so I was bedridden at 4 months, and I wasn't making art, and I was at a really, really low point. And I was talking to my therapist, and I was telling her, I said, I really feel like I need to create because I think it's going to save my life. She's, oh, well, yeah, we need to do that. We're trying to figure out how do I do that in the bed all day because I can't move. And I picked back up latch hooking because it's a very remote kind of thing. And so from there, I got really interested in what it means to be repetitive, what it means to do these same gestures over and over again, what it means for our brain. And I got interested in the neuroscience behind that. And so what once was a hobby when I was, 12, 13 years old became the thing that I felt saved, one of the things that helped to pull me out of a really dark space. What it has invited me to do is to slow my life down. The work that I make is methodical, it is laborious, it is time consuming. And it's interesting too, because, I try to educate my audience often about my practice because, also people think artists are magical and they're like, oh, make this thing in 2 days. And I'm like, not going to happen. Right. Yeah. And so I have to educate my audience a lot. And one of the things that I educate them about is how time consuming this is. And then, you might find me in public spinning yarn and people are like, why is this the way you want to spend your time? Why spend your time doing this? And I'm like, why not? Why are you not slowing down enough so that you could actually, sit with what is? My practice of latch hooking, of spinning yarn, and even collage making has been an invitation for me to slow down because I am so distracted and inundated every day, all day with things. I'm overstimulated, all the things, right? We all are. And also the science and neuroscience is saying that our brains are actually not functioning well because of how overwhelmed we are and we think we are. And we're actually not. We're at our worst state mentally, which we all can see too. And so for me, part of the reason why I do this work is to heal myself. Part of the reason why I do the work that I do is so that I can connect back to my being, my body, and also to God. And so these things are intentional. But the challenge tends to be also is I am trying to create this world for myself that invites slowness, but I'm also operating in a world that doesn't honor that. I'm operating in a world that honors urgency, grind, get it, you know what I mean? No sleep, blah, blah, blah. And I think in some ways that could be fruitful for some, but I think it's not for all of us. And I had to learn the hard way that it wasn't for me. And so it became a calling of mine to be like, okay, either I slow down or I perish in a way. And I felt like bits of me perishing because I was so, moving all the time.
Why do you spin your own yarn first? And then with these materials already available out there, why go and spin your own yarn?
Yeah. So I would answer that question in 3 ways, I think. Well, there are 3 answers to that question. Maybe it's a better way to say that. The first is, which I talked a little bit about earlier, was like being able to tell a full story. And so part of what I've been doing is I've been trying to excavate these stories that have been untold. And so I've been on a learning journey to find out who were the Black spinners? Where did they land? Where did they go, right? But as we all know, that a lot of that history has been eradicated. And so it's been a bit harder to find. But I have found where there have been some ads slave ads, unfortunately. And now when I read a slave ad, I have so much more context that when I read it and it says great spinner, I know that they're talking about yarn spinning, whereas I didn't know that before.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons why I spin yarn, because I'm trying to bridge the gap in these stories, right, and what we know. Another reason is, which I've also mentioned before, like when I spin yarn, it is part mesmerizing and part meditative. Like even the act of the equipment in and of itself, it's done by what's called, treadles. So I'm like treadling with my feet, and so everything is working through my physical being. And there's also something to be said about that, like to then be able to produce something through my actual physical being.
Yeah.
But it's slow, like that wheel is turning, at a very certain speed that I want to go. And again, like me spinning yarn also could be a great metaphor of how I want to live my life. It's due to the physicality of my body and how well I'm postured. But also when I'm treadling, it's going as fast or as slow as I want it to go. And then the creation of the yarn as it's turning around the bobbin, depending on how thick or thin or wavy, or how much I'm actually feeding into the orifice itself, also is what happens. So
That's crazy.
It's a way for, I know, it's like part I have language for and part I don't. It's like part of it is just about the practice of being in it and the creation of something, and then to then be able to say that I've spun this yarn and can now use it again, mind blown. So that's the second thing. The third reason why yarn spinning is important to me is because making these fiber 2D, 3D wall pieces and using this material, I've also have been very cognizant about how much material I produce and waste in a way. So people see the end product, but I'm shaving stuff down, I'm combing stuff out, I'm cutting, and I produce a lot of yarn waste, a lot of fiber waste. And what I also know is that textile waste is one of the highest waste issues of our world. It doesn't decompose. We barely have textile recycling centers in the US. Most of them are abroad. The US actually barely even recycles its own material. It's wild to me. But textile waste is like the biggest for our planet. And so it was also an invitation for me to think about like my own footprint. What does this mean as I'm using this material and making these beautiful byproducts? As I'm healing myself, these beautiful byproducts are being made, but then there's also this waste pile. And so what does it mean to actually reclaim that waste? So the yarn that I'm spinning, I'm actually using the yarn that I cut down. So I'm actually doing a process what's called carding. And this is like the gesture you do when you're carding. So I'm carding that waste back down. And then I'm now back at my wheel, feeding the orifice of my wheel this waste, right? So now it's a reclamation of story, reclamation of material. All these things are cyclical for me. So it's, I don't know, it's beautiful in a way. It's kind of hard to explain in some ways, but I have language in other ways, if that makes sense. But those are the three reasons why I spin yarn.
Hi, I'm Bobby J. Each month, WPTY, WDRA, and Anheuser-Busch will give a deserving high school senior a $1,000 scholarship.
I connect with your work in so many ways. A little bit about on your collaging side, creation and that whole process.
My love for images came, again, as a young girl. And I remember being in my granny's house. Everybody's there, family gathering. And there was a point in the day where the elders would go into the sitting room, pull out the photo albums and look at the albums and tell stories. I was usually the only kid in that room. Everybody else off playing. I'm like, where the albums, where the photos? I want to hear what's going on. Who is this? Who is that? So I fell in love with images then.
Okay.
And as an artist, when you go through art school, one of the foundations of art is needing to know how to draw. And I hated drawing, but I still loved images.
Yeah.
And so there was a point in my journey where I felt like collage was the best way to merge my love of story and images with just like the notion of like how I loved portraits so much, but didn't like to draw them. So me getting to collage had a lot to do with that, but also I was trying to envision and manifest my idea of like what could look like chaos in a way, or look like world building in another way. So when you look at my collages, you see a lot of abstraction within the figure. That's intentional because I want the viewer in a way to then question what they're looking at. And the question then becomes, is this abstraction like, again, is it like what's happening here? Is this supposed to be? Or is it like actually these figures are manifesting something and they're building something and they're taking elements of conventional materials and they're manifesting, you know, maybe something new, something reimagined. And so my collage work is a lot about world building and how we are, or I am rather, how I'm thinking about, you know, creating these worlds for these images that are unknown, that are maybe unrecognizable, but are still true and real. And either the image needs to create that world, or they need to go through that world, or they need to take some of that world with them, and so I'm trying to tell that story with abstraction and with images in my work. And I think for me, what I'm also trying to do is be a mirror to the audience of this is also us. This is also me as a human being trying to figure out, like, you know, is what is happening in my life actually chaos, or is it something that I actually need to reimagine and build from? Is this something that I need to take with me, or is this something that I've created? And so in a way, I'm trying to be a mirror for the audience to say, yo, this is actually us too, in a visually compelling way.
I love it. You got an exhibition up at the time of this recording. You have an exhibition going on called Soft Space, right? Tell us about Soft Space.
Yeah, so Soft Space, you know, we talk about being brave to tell our truth, and Soft Space is in fact that. I was having a conversation again in therapy. I have a lot of breakthrough moments in therapy that I feel like manifest in real time. But I was having a conversation in therapy about the need of wanting to be more soft to myself. And I feel like it's more easy for me to show up in a way for others and have a level of softness for others than it is for myself. And so I was grappling with that with my therapist. Like, why is that? Why am I so, you know? And so we were talking about just my childhood experiences and the absence of my father. And, you know, we're going through the therapeutic things, the therapy talk. Right? And so I just remember saying to her, like, yeah, I think part of my work is like providing a soft space for me, and how that soft space has to be true for me, so that I can actually authentically show up soft for others, soft for my son, soft for my husband. Right? And so that became the story that I wanted to tell with this show. And so then my work was like, okay, how do I visualize the feeling? And so I started to make these, what I'm calling soft paintings. And they're of these like kind of 2D, 3-dimensional, I guess, portraits. It's actually called a self-portrait of garments and textiles and fabric that I've placed in a way in a frame that kind of, you know, comes out of the frame. It undulates it a lot. Like it's smooth and it's, you know, tactile, makes you want to touch it. And a lot of the fabric that I use for that are like old sweaters and garments that I've had, colors and shapes and patterns that remind me of my childhood and of experiences that I had. But I titled that piece, and it's 4 panels, but I titled that piece a self-portrait because it is, you know, it's also very contained in a way, because I feel like that I've tried to contain my softness in a lot of different ways, but yet it still pours out. But also the notion hard container around my softness feels true for me too. And so that's the visual representation that I'm trying to show in my work with Soft Space. And it's the start of a new body of work that I'm working on. And then I have 3 latch hook fiber pieces in the show as well that I've titled after my aunts who are no longer with us, who are now my ancestors. And I titled those 3 pieces after them because I feel like, in a way, that, so I come from a long line of strong Black women. I think a lot of Black women can attest to that. And so in a lot of ways, I knew their strong story. Like, I knew the story of their heartache and their pain and how they turned that heartache into pain, into like strength. But I didn't know their soft stories. And now they're no longer with me. And so I wanted to honor them through this soft kind of work as an invitation to say, I see you, and I see why you were so strong, and an invitation for me to also say that we can hold both. We can hold strength and softness. And how do I do that right now as a woman in this body is what Soft Space is about. So.
I love this conversation. I love this artwork. I love the presence that you bring on this call. And that's what this is about. That's what Museum of Presence is about. That's what we all want to show, is that, there's presence in every part of our lives. Right? There is building, there is structure, there is confinement, there is busting out of the confinement. There is, birth and creation and growth and all of this through every part of this. And we want to say we appreciate everything that you have brought to the table with your artwork, with your presence. I've been wanting to do this for so long, so it is an honor, seriously, to be able to have this opportunity to listen to you. Creation is huge in my mind. That is this presence to me that I call Edo Eden. And Edo is a Greek word for a long and prosperous journey, and Eden is the Garden of Eden. So, I believe this journey is ongoing. You always are creating. God created Eden, and then God created us, and he created animals. He created light and dark. So it's just like continuously processing creation. So that is what I heard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all so much.
Brittney Boyd Bullock, with a very interesting way of practicing her craft. And it turns out that this is a little bit of a movement, this slowing down with the work, this harking back to ancestral traditions and even the way that we create our materials. And so we wonder if there aren't other practitioners that are following in Brittney's footsteps as well. This session of the Museum of Presence is brought to you in part by a small grant by Metro Arts Nashville and a contribution from Studio Bank and from listeners just like you. But I would be remiss not to point out the contributions of my fellow producers, Camilla Sander, Tanya Lewis, Evan Brown, Christopher Latouche, Chris Cowley, and a bunch of other lovely people from Nashville. And I'm Shabazz Larkin. You are now entering the Museum of Presence.